Charles Oliveira is probably the most impressive fighter in the lightweight division right now. He's got a big fight coming up against Islam Makhachev in October. But before we get to that, this is as good a time as any to recap Oliveira's top finishes and greatest moments of his career. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. Starting with Oliveira versus Nick Lentz. Making the cut is one of Oliveira's performances from a time when he was only considered to be a decent grappler. The striking prowess that we see in him today wasn't fully developed, and he was only a shadow of the fighter that he is today. He also found himself missing weight for the featherweight division, and people believed that he didn't have the consistency in him to make it to the top. Despite all that, when he entered the octagon against Lentz, he produced a grappling clinic. The way he'd switch from a Thai clinch to a guillotine while standing was so impressive and caught Lentz off guard that he couldn't live with it. It was one of the best finishes from Oliveira, who made Lentz tap out because the only other option he had left was going to sleep. Not to mention the fight against Clay Guida. One of the greatest moments of Oliveira's career came in his fight against Clay Guida in UFC 225. Guida was known as one of the toughest fighters on the roster, and he was the kind of fighter to go to war with his punches if needed. A relentless grappler, Guida was also a former Strikeforce champion, and he was facing Oliveira, who'd lost 3 of his last 4 and was on the cusp of getting cut. Now that's the kind of pressure that can get the worst out of a fighter, but not this Brazilian beast. Du Bronx came up with the goods once the fight began and submitted Guida via guillotine choke and ended the challenge that seemed so daunting at one point. Not to mention, that fight began his 10-fight win streak in the UFC, making him one of the most impressive fighters on the planet. Moving on, Charles versus Jim Miller. Jim Miller's one of the few fighters that have the honor of defeating Charles Oliveira in the UFC. Unfortunately for Miller, Oliveira never really forgot the brutal welcome he received to the UFC by Miller in only his 3rd fight for the company. Great fighters tend to remember their losses, and Oliveira is definitely one of the very best. In the return fight, Oliveira took his revenge in the best way possible. It was one of the best fights of his career as he submitted the American via rear naked choke in just over a minute of superb fighting. This fight established his status as one of the very best grapplers in the division, and the Brazilian hasn't looked back since. Revenge has been taken, grappling status restored. What's next for Oliveira? Up next, the Darren Elkins challenge. Charles Oliveira has faced many fighters that are known for their gritty attitude and never give up fighting spirit. The Brazilian has faced way too many fighters that offer a different sort of challenge, a nagging one, which means you have to complete the job or run the risk of getting smashed late in the fight. When Oliveira made his debut, he came up against one of the grittiest fighters in the division, Darren Elkins, who was planning on ruining the first night fight for Oliveira, but he wanted his debut to be memorable, and he made sure that was the case. He submitted a tough opponent first up, and did it by making his mark with a triangle choke that ended Elkins' resistance. If someone makes a debut like that one, they're going straight to the very top, and Oliveira's done exactly that, hasn't he? After that, the Kevin Lee fight. Fighting someone at a catch weight of 158 pounds can't be easy, and it happened because Kevin Lee was slightly heavier for the fight. For Oliveira, it posed a big issue, but one that he didn't consider to be too much, and he came in as the favorite and fought as the favorite too. Kevin Lee had just knocked out Gregor Gillespie in brutal fashion, and even though he wasn't the favorite, he still wanted to make a run at lightweight. Not to mention the fact that the entire fight took place during the COVID-19 times, and that meant no fans in the arena. That can't be easy as it almost seems like a practice, and not to mention, Oliveira got dominated throughout the fight and no one gave him a chance to come out on top. However, Du Bronx caught Lee due to his superior grappling and ended up making him tap to a guillotine in superb fashion. On to the Fight Night 144 with David Teymur. We've taken a look at Oliveira's wins through his spectacular grappling skills, but this one is a testament to the Brazilian's crisp and developed striking and showcases just how far he's come since his debut in the promotion. David Teymur is a kickboxing specialist, so this had to be something special from Oliveira to win, and you best believe it was. Teymur moved swiftly and actually dropped Oliveira Oliveira in the first round, but the Brazilian swiftly recovered to get back on his feet and went on to shift the momentum in his favor. He landed an insane elbow on Tamer, which stunned him, and he couldn't believe it. Still in shock, Ollie doubled up, landing a superb combination that left his opponent out on his feet and wrapped up a guillotine to finish him. It was easily one of the best moments of his career. Add to that the fight against Eric Wisely. Do you know what a calf slicer submission is? Don't worry, most casual fans have no idea, and there are no extra points for knowing either. We're sure, though, that once you hear the term calf slicer, you can identify the pain it must inflict, and you're on the spot if you guessed it. A calf slicer sounds like something complicated that must hurt like crazy, and that's what happened to Eric Wisely. Unfortunately, in his fight against Charles Oliveira, the Brazilian landed a heel hook, but Wisely started to slip out of the grip, so do Bronx improvised and changed it by sticking his leg in that painful little bend of Wisely's knee. Every replay hurts, and we can't believe the pain Eric would have been in. Charles pulled Wisely back onto him, putting pressure on the knee, and Wisely had nowhere to go and tapped out of the misery. Into the top 3 with the Dustin Poirier win. Talking about his first title defense, Oliveira was given the tough task of fighting Dustin Poirier. Everyone who remembers watching the fight knows that Poirier was the favorite to win. In fact, analysts and fans alike expected Dustin to walk through Oliveira and win the belt, but what we got was quite the opposite. The first round was a very back and forth one, with both landing multiple strikes, while Oliveira dominated the second round with some brilliant flash strikes. The betting favorite, Poirier, had no idea what he was up against though, as do Bronx took the fight to the next level in the third and completely tired Poirier. By the fourth, Charles finished the fight via the rear naked choke in one of the most impressive finishes to a fight. How can we forget the Tony Ferguson fight? Ferguson was coming off a tough-to-take loss against Justin Gaethje, his first in 7 years, and everyone once again bet against Charles Oliveira. To be fair, everyone did believe that Ferguson would end Oliveira because the boogeyman would tear his next opponent in a bid to make a statement. They weren't wrong, because you wouldn't want to face Tony after a loss, especially when he's still on top of his game. Oliveira, though, had different plans altogether. He didn't wait for Ferguson to set the tempo and decided to dictate proceedings in a grappling-heavy approach, which, until that point, no one had attempted against Ferguson. Tony, an All-American wrestler and a BJJ black belt, had no chance of surviving and won the fight via decision, ending any chances of a Ferguson win thanks to a stunning performance in what would be one of his favorite moments as a fighter. Lastly, at number 1, the win over Michael Chandler in UFC 262. The left hook, which was heard around the world, is how people describe the punch that secured an insane win for Oliveira, as he finished one of the best fighters in the world, Michael Chandler. It's by far the most impressive performance, and the best moment and finish to a match by the Brazilian. And boy, was it some win. There could be no sweeter victory than the one that wins you a belt, and we're sure Oliveira still watches the highlights and marvels at his performance, because it was easily the most impressive display of skill by the Brazilian so far in his career. He'll be hoping he can do all that and more against Islam Makhachev on the 23rd of October. That's a wrap for this video. Which of these Charles Oliveira moments is your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.